So today we're continuing our series on looking at the psychology of the characters of Atlas Shrugged. And we have the pleasure today to look at Dr. Hugh Akston, a very prominent figure throughout the book. And first we are going to have Andy give his famous disclaimer.
Yeah, must be famous by this time. Read the book, everybody. It's the greatest novel ever written. It's a mystery story. You don't want to have the mystery spoil for you. There's a lot of spoilers in this series. So read the book first, then watch this series. And I think that's the proper order in which to do it. So go ahead, read the book now.
So Dr. Hugh Akston is a very dignified professor. But we first hear of him at Hank's, I don't want to call it Hank's anniversary party, Lillian's phony anniversary party. Francisco is saying, I am an alumnus of the great school that employs Dr. Pritchett at present, the Patrick Henry University, but I studied under one of his predecessors, Hugh Akston. Hugh Akston, the attractive young woman gasped, but you couldn't have Senor d'Anconia. You're not old enough. I thought he was one of those great names of the last century. Perhaps in spirit, madam, not in fact. But I thought he died years ago. Why, no, he's still alive. Then why don't we ever hear about him anymore? He retired 9 years ago. I'm shortening it a bit. Isn't it odd when a politician or a movie star retires, we read front page stories about it. But when a philosopher retires, people do not even notice it. They do eventually. A young man said, astonished, I thought Hugh Akston was one of those classics that nobody studied anymore, except in histories of philosophy. I read an article recently which referred to him as the last of the great advocates of reason. Just what did Hugh Akston teach? And asked the earnest matron. Francisco answered, he taught that everything is something. That's in contrast to what Dr. Pritchett teaches, that nothing is anything. Your loyalty to your teacher is laudable, Senor d'Anconia, said Dr. Pritchett dryly. May we take it that you're an example of the practical results of his teaching? I am. So Andy, take it from there.
This is great stuff. Again, I guess every episode we do, I have to marvel at Ayn Rand's ability to integrate philosophy into characters, plot, and conflict, dialogue. I mean, nobody does it.
Humor.
No, yeah, humor. It's all there. So that's right. So a few things about Hugh Akston. Again, he's a really good character. He's a father figure to the three heroes here, Galt, Francisco, and Ragnar. And he was a competing father figure one time with Robert Stadler, although Stadler betrayed the greatness within his own soul, and thereby the trust of the people who loved him and who he loved. But Hugh Akston remained true to reason and individual rights, and banning the initiation of force and living in a free society. So he's a father figure, and you can see the love he has for his three sons, and the love they have for him. At the same time, he's an embodiment of certain philosophic principles, and of course, he says it several times in the story that contradictions do not exist. And if you think you've encountered one, check your premise. He says it to Dagny, in fact. He said, you'll find that, that contradictions don't exist. You'll find that one of your premises is wrong. And I think, the contrast, and Ayn Rand shows it so nicely, is beautifully in this scene, the contrast between Hugh Akston, who taught that everything is something, and his successor at the Patrick Henry University, Simon Pritchett, who teaches that nothing is anything. The contrast here, Ayn Rand is showing us embodied in these two characters, the role of philosophy in the real world. And Francisco says, and the world doesn't notice, society doesn't notice when a philosopher retires. In time they do. And what happens to human society when the advocates of reason in philosophy retire or are suppressed, like in today's world, I could say are canceled, by cancel culture. When the advocates of reason are not heard anymore for these different reasons, in the field of philosophy, the field of philosophy becomes overrun by irrationalists. And we see, and it's not an accident. Ayn Rand shows us some scenes, well, in flashback perhaps, but at the Patrick Henry University. And that is, the universities are the conduit by means of which philosophy comes into human society. Because in many cases, maybe most cases, people who become eminent and influential in society get educated in the universities. It's like Francisco and Galt and Ragnar study with Hugh Akston, and now people are studying with Simon Pritchett. And Ayn Rand showing us, when the Hugh Akstons of the world are the dominant philosophers in the universities, these are the shining exemplars who study with them and go out into human society and do great things. But when the Simon Pritchetts, of the world are the major philosophy professors, and people are studying with them, well, those kind of people become similar to James Taggart and Lillian Riordan and Mr. Thompson and Floyd Ferris and Wesley Marsh. And so who the leading philosophers of a society are, an enormous impact, on the culture and on the politics of that society. I just make one last point, and we turn over to Shoshana. When Floyd Ferris's book comes out, was it Why Do You Think That You Think? And Stadler is so understandably contemptuous of it. And one of the things he says to Ferris is, if Hugh Akston was still around, no journal of philosophy would review this, in effect, this piece of garbage. And Floyd Ferris says venomously, like the reptile he is, Hugh Akston isn't around. Well, yeah, that's what happens when the Hugh Akstons aren't around. This kind of intellectual vomit is published and becomes culturally influential.
Yeah, what you just mentioned reminded me, there was a scene with Taggart Transcontinental. These are not the days of Miss Taggart. These are not the days of Dagny Taggart. Yeah. When something goes wrong and things were different then. Yeah, so I think that there's a sense in which some people describe, embody a whole practice, and Hugh Akston certainly embodies the distinguished practice of someone who is both, an intellectual teacher and an inspiration all the way around, because that's part of what he did, is that he invited them over, he gave them cocoa. And I think even that's part of their friendship, is that the three of them were able to go to the, directly to the advanced courses, to study the most interesting things, and to do so together, because they weren't just being, tutored one-on-one by him, but they were in classes. And I think that does make us aware that there were people who were in those classes who didn't become like them. And so there isn't necessarily a one-to-one correspondence between the splendid teacher and the student, because there were other students there too. And of course, as a teacher, one hopes that the other ones get something too, even if they don't turn out to be like the three splendid students. Well, I think that, what I really love with Hugh Akston is that it's a bit like some of the other characters that we hear about him and then we get to meet him, he's a legend. And then we do get to meet him, and I'm sure we're going to be looking at the diner scene. And I have my Akston Diner cup here.
It says Akston?
It does.
Yes.
Yeah, Akston Diner. Okay. And then of course, we hear from him in the valley, and speaking to Dagny, and understanding about the relationship between Dagny and John before he's been told. So basically in Legend, he's wonderful. In the scenes that we see, he's wonderful. Even the fact that, as you pointed out, by report, he has impact. When Floyd Ferris says that to Stadler, that has impact. He's even mentioned in the scene with the wet nurse, when Riordan says, mothers should go out on their knees looking for teachers like Hugh Akston. Yeah. So there's a sense in which he's the philosopher teacher, and he's an important character behind everything. And yet I don't think that we're supposed to well, he quit 9 years ago. So Galt was ahead of him, in the sense of understanding the world and what had to happen. And that's also something that can happen to a teacher, which is wonderful when the students can do more.
Yeah.
When the student becomes the teacher, and the teacher is man enough or woman enough to learn from his former student and younger protege. And by the way, Hugh Akston makes a damn good burger too. So we got to put that to his credit.
So I can bring us to that scene now. He's talking about his 3 pupils that he had. That he's had many bright people in the past, but these were inseparable friends. And I'll blend scenes, but they were 16 years old when they came to the university. And Stadler and Dr. Akston loved these students, loved them. They were a gift to any teacher to have 3 bright, brilliant minds, active minds who would stay in your backyard till all hours in the morning, even sleep there, just to talk and ask interesting questions and learn and challenge the teacher himself, Hugh Akston. And he absolutely adores them. And now he's obviously going, as you said, Andy, he's taught in Shoshana. He's the teacher has been taught by John Galt. John Galt solved the problem of how to fight this tyranny of need, the horrible moral code that was killing all good people. And he's talking with Dagny. Dagny goes into this hamburger place to talk to Hugh Akston. She's followed her trail, and he's kind of the end of the trail to find out who built this motor. And Hugh Akston makes the best hamburger ever, and she's watching his expertise. And he goes into the story about his 3 students. I added some from before, but they were majoring in physics and philosophy. And that he and Stadler were both a bit jealous over them, but he really wasn't. He knew that there was room for both Stadler and himself in that. So,
well, we don't get the whole story of the students here.
No,
because we're in the diner. She basically touches base with that question and with Stadler and so on. This is the same Hugh Akston, as if, and then she gets the fuller story when they're in the valley. But it's a wonderful scene because Dagny is so delighted that she's found this person she can offer a better job to, and he doesn't want it. And that, now we're in the territory of checking your premises. And because why is that? And she's trying to get information out of him, and she's asking a lot of good questions. And he shows her how much he knows without telling her what he can't tell her. So I think that scene is especially a wonderful one to look at after you've read the book and you go back and everything. Here's Dagny interviewing him, and he's not lying directly, but there are some things he can't tell her, including why he doesn't want this job being the head cook for Taggart Transcontinental. I think it's sort of a neat sequence that the diner is so good, because the people, the strikers, they're not giving to the outside world the benefit of their real professions, but he makes a great burger. The world is not going to fall apart if Hugh Akston made a bad burger. Yeah. So it wouldn't do any good for the strike if he made a bad burger. And he's just, good at, what does it take to make a good burger? And he's going to do it. And I like that, I like the skill.
And Ayn Rand showing us, as always, in manifold scenes, the power of reason. For a rational person, it's possible. Hugh Akston might have had a cook or housekeeper. I don't know. Or was he married at one point, and his wife cooked in a conventional marriage? I don't know. But even if he had never cooked a meal before, the power of his mind is such that he could master being a short order cook, he could master any number of skills, how to cook burgers, or, how to fix the car. If he had never worked on a car, this is the power of reason, especially when you have a high powered mind behind it, like his. So, Ayn Rand always combating that Platonic idea that reason is, Hamlet is a great example of it in literature, that reason is either dealing with some world of its own, like Robert Stadler and his cosmic rays, or it's impractical. Hamlet, who was a philosophy student at the University of Wittenberg, right? Hamlet's thinking, and he's by the time he takes decisive action, it's too late. And I think part of what Shakespeare is showing us in Hamlet is his view on reason, that that reason was it paralysis by analysis. That too much, if you're a thinker, you can't be a man of action. And I'm going to say, no, that is all false. Look at the people who carried us forward in history. Well, whether it was the Aristotles or the Newtons or the Shakespeare's himself, all these great minds are the ones who carried us forward. Learn how to cure, how to grow crops and how to cure diseases. The men and women of the mind. This is the most practical ability of all. And as Hank Greenan says, the practical depends on what it is you intend to practice. And if what you intend to practice is flourishing human life and all this plethora of skills, including cooking burgers, then reason, and thinking effectively is the fundamental skill. And that's what enables us to master all these other skills, including, running the Akston diner. So Ayn Rand always showing us that integration between theory and practice, reason and living, the role of reason in human life is to create values, including outstanding burgers. So, about issues big and small, life-giving philosophy to nutritious burgers. Ayn Rand showing us everything in between. Ayn Rand showing us the power of reason to create life-giving values.
And I think the paternal love that he has for his three students is something that we can address. That he, just like Hank, loved the wet nurse at the end, and you get that paternal feeling of just cherishing his son. His three students, Rania, Francisco, and
Galt.
And Galt, yeah, thank you, were the people, his children. He cared for them like that. He'd say, Rania, get off the wet grass. And Rania would jump up immediately because he used to do that as a kid. This is when we're in Atlantis.
Yeah,
now.
the pirate who risks his life every day jumps when his father figure tells him to do something.
Yeah, so if you want to address the father figure aspect of it, either one, Shoshana, do you want to jump in?
I think it's obviously it's just a little incident, and the key thing is that he doesn't want any harm to come to him. And that was part of his vision of the world, is that he wanted it to be a place in which these three sons could grow, could flourish, could have the future they deserved. And so, the bit about not being on the wet grass is just a little example of that, it's something you could change, and you should change to make your life better. But the big thing is that he wants the world to be hospitable to these three sons, as opposed to a place that would mistreat them and denigrate them and not be grateful to them. And so his concern for them as a parent is related to his bigger picture of what can go wrong when we don't know who is John Galt and who is the mind is responsible for the great achievements in the world.
So he's in love with an unobstructed future for those,
yes,
for students, for anybody.
And throughout her novels, Ayn Rand makes one brilliant commentary on family after another. In The Fountainhead, for example, where Rourke does, we don't know much about Rourke's childhood. Ayn Rand shows us a lot about the childhood of the other major players, but little or nothing about Rourke's childhood. And part that's a statement about free will. Rourke, not because of his genetic wiring or his social conditioning. He's Rourke because of Rourke. He's Rourke because of the choices he made, because of volition. I think, that part of it, Ayn Rand is showing us that the nature versus nurture dispute doesn't cover the waterfront. It omits volition. Volition is the biggest part of it. But also regarding family, uh, it's Rock didn't turn out to be the way he is because his mother did this or his father did that or whatever, but because of the choices he made. And who are Rock's family? I mean, Henry Cameron is his father, more or less. Dominique Franklin, love of his life, and his wife. Gail Winans, his soulmate, brother. Steve Mallory, his kid brother. He's got all these close friends who are like brothers to him. And Ayn Rand showing us brilliantly here that family is not fundamentally about blood. Family is about values. Yeah, you have no choice about your blood relatives, and hopefully they're good people, but that ain't necessarily so, as they say. And you choose your family. Family's about values. And here we see it again brilliantly. Hugh Akston, these are his children. Are they his biological children? No. But he couldn't love them more and be more encouraging and supportive and proud of them than if they were his biological children. And they respect and revere him. It's like you said, Ellen Ragnar, jump up off the grass. When Dad says, Ragnar, don't sit on the grass. What is it, dangerous to sit on the grass? This guy has people shooting guns at him every day. But this is Dad, and it's not just Dad. He's Hugh Akston. Hugh Akston is my father. Now, Ragnar, of course, was excommunicated, was ex-con by his father, the bishop, and maybe disowned. But he's certainly not going to be disowned by his spiritual father. And you can see the bond, the love and the respect that they have for their dad, who's their mentor. It's a kind of relationship, presumably, that Socrates had with Plato, and Plato had with Aristotle, and Aristotle had with Alexander. This brilliant mentoring relationship that's similar to a parental relationship. And Ayn Rand really showing this is family. Doesn't matter if they're biologically related. This is what a human family could be. It's about values and grounded, of course, in the fundamental of all, and that is reason. And it's very touching, when Ayn Rand shows us what family really is.
Shoshana?
No, I was just thinking of the particular situation of watching a student, grow up.
Yeah.
And because, when they arrive as students, he has a lot to teach them. And then they start teaching him and they learn from each other. Mm-hmm. And then, ordinarily in a student relationship, they leave school and sometimes you see them, sometimes you don't. I think that what we have here is that they also become friends. It's not as if it's always a hierarchical relationship that he's their teacher. And that's a splendid thing, that you can grow your own, not just grow your own family, you can grow your own friends. And that I think it's a really great contrast between Hugh Akston and Robert Stadler.
Yeah.
Because who's one of the big villains of the book, and that's one of the things that makes him a villain, is that he hates John Galt. Right. That his especially John Galt, and which of course means he hates himself, he hates life. And for Hugh Akston, he's in love with all of these things. Right. And he's clever, even as I was saying a minute ago, that he realizes, he tells Dagny that he's proud of every value they have chosen, meaning her. Yeah. And right. He's figured it out. And she has not been in Atlantis very long. And Hugh Akston hasn't exactly been following them around. So he's really picked up on it very quickly. And he's right. And she knows it. And she lets it go with that. She doesn't, how did you know? Just
we can extrapolate very nicely, I think, what kind of relationship there's going to be between Hugh Akston and his daughter-in-law. That dad and daughter-in-law are going to love each other. They're going to have a really good relationship. Reminds me, when you're saying, Shoshana, John Roebling, the creator of the Brooklyn Bridge and the guy who perfected the suspension bridge. He was a curmudgeon. Nobody could get along with him. He worked every day. He didn't matter. He was never sick a day in his life. He just worked 7 days a week. Was never owned himself defeated. Couldn't get along with anybody. But his daughter-in-law his son Washington Roebling married Emily Warren. Emily Warren Roebling, who eventually contributed mightily to the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, and she got along with him. He respected her intelligence and everything, and he really happy his son married her. And she said, "Wow, why can't people get along with him? He's a pussycat." She got along with him. Now Hugh Akston is not hard to get along with, but
No.
I think Dagny Taggart's going to have the kind of relationship with Hugh Akston that Emily Warren Roebling had with her husband's father, with John Roebling. So there's this. Ayn Rand knew the history of industry, and she knew American history. She might even have known some of this even before she wrote Atlas Shrugged. I don't know, but you could see given who they are, who Hugh Akston is, who John Galt is, who the other two, Ragnar and Francisco are, who Dagny is. It's gonna be one big happy family. I mean, this is really family again. Family is based in a proper family is based in rational values, and Dagny and Hugh Akston share that.
So just on that point, Andy, when they're in the valley and Dagny has to make a decision, Ayn Rand describes Hugh Akston as compassionately gentle. He said, "We'll wait. We'll wait for you." He talks about man is a social being during that.
But
He
not
also,
in the way the losers preach.
right. He said, he's talking to his future daughter-in-law. Uh, this is Hugh Akston speaking. "Consider the reasons which make us certain that we are right." This is about her decision to stay in the valley or to leave, "but not the fact that we are certain. If you are not convinced, ignore our certainty. Don't be tempted to substitute our judgment for your own." You just get that wonderful tenderness, that respect for her mind. And I think that percolates through all of the heroes that we've been talking about, the respect for one another's minds.
And character, the moral principle, the intellect that enables them to create life-giving achievements, and the moral character that enables them to care about life-giving achievements. Yeah, there's enormous mutual respect here, and then that's part of what a family should be. Many of us grow up in families that aren't like that, but that's what families might be and ought to be. In some cases, they are.
Yeah. So I want to just do a contrast quickly, and then we can come back to all the positives of Hugh Akston. But Hugh was asking Dagny that he said, "I would gather from a question that Dagny asked him, the nature of what Robert Stadler said to you about the three students." He says, "Tell me, why did he speak of them at all?" And so Dagny, he saw the faint movement of her bitter smile. And Dagny says, he's told me their story as a justification for his belief in the futility of human intelligence. He told it to me as an example of his disillusioned hope. Theirs was the kind of ability one expects to see in the future changing the course of the world." And Hugh says, "Well, haven't they done so?" She nodded slowly, holding her head inclined for a long moment in acquiescence and in homage.
Yeah, Robert Stadler says something like about Galt, that he was the kind of intellect that people would be talking about. Well, they are talking about it. Dr. Stadler, they ask, and we could point out to him, they are talking about it. They say all the time, "Who is John Galt?"
Right.
Well, remember when she says, "Who's the third student?" And he says, "His name would mean nothing to you."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that's not honest, is it?
well,
He knows
it's
it's not Galt.
yeah. Well, I think that she probably would not immediately say, "Oh no, that's it's the Galt that everybody's talking about," because she's heard all these different versions. But I think it's an interesting way to he's not answering the question, because he doesn't actually, he says he'll find you when he wants to.
Right. So just continuing with that same scene, he said, this is Hugh Akston, Dr. Akston, talking to Dagny. "What I want you to understand, Miss Taggart, is the full evil of those who claim to have become convinced that this earth, by its nature, is a realm of malevolence. where the good has no chance to win. Let them check their premises. Let them check their standards of value. Let them check before they grant themselves the unspeakable license of evil as necessity, whether they know what is the good and what are the conditions it requires. Robert Stadler now believes that intelligence is futile and human life can be nothing but irrational. Did he expect John Galt to become a great scientist willing to work under the orders of Dr. Floyd Ferris? Did he expect Francisco d'Anconia to become a great industrialist willing to produce under the orders and for the benefit of Wesley Mooch? Did he expect Rania Danishko to become a great philosopher, willing to preach under the order of Dr. Simon Pritchett? There is no mind and that might is right. She's brilliant that way because she really helps us to see that these people are evil, and if they're in charge, you're putting into slavery, you're enslaving the minds of the best men of the producers.
That's well said, Ellen. It's
it's
absolutely right.
interesting. He talks in a somewhat similar tone to Dagny, whether they're in the diner or whether they're in Atlantis, after which she knows things.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. He's always withholding information when he has to out in the diner, but he's still talking to her with respect, and he'll tell her whatever he can.
Yeah.
You know, because in the Valley, of course, now she knows who the third student is.
Right.
And yeah, that's not a mystery anymore.
And when she decides to go back, he is so gentle with her. He says, we know you'll return. Take one question back with you. And that's the question. Are they truly, does evil exist? Are these, I forget the exact question. Do you remember it? But does evil really exist? Are they evil? Or is it an error of knowledge? He says, you will return, Dagny, because yours is an error of knowledge.
Mhm.
And he's just so wonderful that way.
He's like a father to her also. I think even if she doesn't marry Galt, you could see the relation, the bond that they have. You know, he regards her as a daughter in the way he regards the other three as sons. She you know, and he treats her that way.
Right, he does. Right. So, last thoughts about Hugh Akston?
I wish I could have had him as my philosophy professor, you know, in grad school. Rather than the Simon Pritchett types, you know that in some cases I did have to deal with.
You know, I mean, in some ways it's easy to talk about his character because he's entirely consistent and he's a full adult, you know, and so he's not someone who, we don't know him before he is during the strike. We hear about him, and he was the last of the advocates of reason or the first of their return. So, you know, he's and reason is key to the book. So we already know a lot about him. I still really love the drama of the scene in the diner. I think that's just a wonderful scene because you might almost think that Dagny would be sharp enough to trip him up. I mean, she's a woman with a mission, and this man knows something, and she's got to find the man who invented the motor. She's got to, because she sort of followed the trail from Mrs. Hastings.
Right.
Okay.
Yes,
you know,
did.
And my husband's young idol was there, and there's this man, and I saw him in the diner and in the wilds of the Midwest. And so, you know, as she says, when she sees him, I've followed such a trail to get to you. And when he knows what she wants, he knows who she is, and he's willing, you know, like Francisco, to tell her certain things, but he can't tell her other things. And and he's immediately impressed by her. What, you know, he was impressed by her before he met her, but now that he knows who she is, yeah, that fits. And then and he also tells her it won't do any good for you to try the conventional methods of getting the facts out of me. Don't send detectives. And what you're looking for is a secret much bigger than the invention of a motor. And I think that he conveys an idea of his stature.
Mhm.
And well, that's who Hugh Akston is. Whatever he's doing, he's bringing to it everything that he is and everything that he has.
Yeah.
And I think that's very powerful. Um, I guess, I sort of wonder what was his, how were things before he met those three students?
Mm.
You know, was it okay, teaching non-geniuses? And what did he learn from that? What did he gain from that? And that's, he's not a main character, so I wouldn't mind having the further adventures of Hugh Akston.
Right,
Just saying.
right. No, I was thinking while you were talking, Shoshana. He's referred to in the story. Aristotle's referred to as our teacher's first teacher.
Yes.
And it's just wonder, even in a 1,000-page novel, you can't include everything. And so Ayn Rand's criterion of selectivity. I wonder what Hugh Akston's books were, because there's Floyd Ferris's book is mentioned, and it's it's a piece of garbage, but it has a role in the plot, to show what kind of a power luster Ferris is and what his weapons are. If Hugh Akston, I'm sure, has written some notable works in philosophy, but I am guessing here Ayn Rand didn't mention them here because they don't further the plot. They're not necessary for to show how Hugh Akston's character fits into the plot as the teacher of these of these brilliant minds. But I'm just wondering, you were talking about the further adventures of Hugh Akston, like we were talking about the adventures of Ragnar Donnerskjold before. The books he'd written, the academic battles he'd fought, the scathing reviews of books like Floyd Ferris's, and the battles that he would fight today in cancel culture. It would be fascinating, to see the further adventures of Hugh Akston. I'm especially interested in the books that he's written.
So I want to mention three points that he makes that stood out for me and probably all of us. We never make assertions, Miss Target, said Hugh Akston. That is the moral crime peculiar to our enemies. We do not tell, we show. It's that wonderful method of induction that is, when I've heard that over the years, that you show, not tell, it was so helpful. It was so helpful in parenting. It's so helpful in all areas of life. The second one is Dagny wonders why he's given up. He says, given up, says Hugh Akston. Check your premises, Miss Taggart. None of us has given up. This is in Atlantis. It's the world that has. And I love that, just flipping it, Ayn Rand's ability to flip it. And he also had this final quote, and if you want to add anything at the end, you guys can jump on in. But he says, every man builds his world in his own image. He has the power to choose, but no power to escape the necessity of choice. If he abdicates his power, he abdicates the status of man. And the grinding chaos of the irrational is what he achieves as his sphere of existence by his choice. Whoever preserves a single thought, uncorrupted by any concession to the will of others, whoever brings into reality a matchstick or a patch of garden made in the image of his thought, he, and to that extent, is a man, and that extent is the sole measure of his virtue. They, he pointed at his pupils, make no concessions. This, he pointed at the valley, is the measure of what they preserved and of what they are. Now I can repeat my answer to the question you asked me, knowing you will understand it fully. You asked me whether I was proud of the way my three sons have turned out. I am more proud than I had ever hoped to be. I am proud of their every action, of their every goal, and of their every value they've chosen. And this, Dagny, is my full answer. And that's Hugh Akston. So I don't know if either of you want to add anything or final thoughts on Hugh Akston.
And that's family. I mean, what would
Well,
many of us have given to have Hugh Akston, not just as a professor, but as our father?
Well, that's true. I'm thinking about that we don't make any assertions because in fact, he is making assertions. It's just that he's got the support for them. So, and I suppose that's implicit. We don't make unsupported assertions. We don't expect our assertions to stand without evidence.
Yeah.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
just
Right.
saying,
The whole valley before telling, Dagny has to see everything first to be able to grasp the principles that she's learning in the valley.
Right.
right?
Hugh Akston, you're making a good point, Shoshana, because Hugh Akston has probably taught logic for like 40 years, and he knows that, the conclusion of an argument is an assertion, but it's one that's supported by evidence. So, he could have said to Dagny, I assume Ayn Rand meant when he said we don't make assertions, he meant unsupported assertions. We show the evidence. And then we draw the conclusion. But I think the meaning comes clear in everything that Hugh Akston says and everything that's been shown to Dagny and the reader by that time.
Yes.
Yeah. He also has that conversation with Dagny about heaven, and because here she is, and all these people she thought were gone forever, here they are,
Right.
and almost like a myth of life after death in which all the great people, including the ones you never met, are there. And he says, well, why should that be after death? Why shouldn't we have that now? And that's very benevolent, it's very powerful. And it's also an introduction to, well, this is where we are now. And that and such a contrast between this and what's outside, what you've been coming from. I mean, Alice Wyatt calls it hell, and this is the world as Dagny had expected to see it at 16, right? Which is
Right.
the age that the three students were. And if she hadn't gone to engineering school and she'd gone to Patrick Henry, then she could have been part of the strike earlier. Just saying, that's a different book. But
And the four of them would have been inseparable. That is a
yes,
different book. Yeah. No, wonderful.
and she would have met Hugh Akston earlier.
Yeah. So it's a little hard to leave Hugh Akston because he's so wonderful, but we can continue to read Atlas Shrugged over and over again and enjoy the information he's taught us. And his psychology is just of a very dignified, proud professor, knowledgeable, confident, gently compassionate in teacher. He shows, he doesn't tell. Andy, it looks
Yeah. He's a great teacher. You can see, I mean, part of being a great teacher, obviously, is to have mastery of your subject in such a way you've induced it, you've extracted the explanatory principles from observational facts. So you present it that way. You can start with the facts and then extract the principles from the facts. It's a great teaching method. He's a great teacher, and the students learn a great deal of philosophy from him. And the other quality, cares. He cares about the students. He's in Ayn Rand's terms, he's enormously benevolent. He cares immensely about the students' education, and he does everything he can to facilitate it. So he's as excellent a teacher. I don't agree with Plato's philosophy, but Aristotle was his best student. He must have been a pretty good teacher. Aristotle certainly thought he was. So Hugh Akston is that kind of teacher.
and he's got the warmth. At the end, Francisco says, he tells him when he's coming back to the valley, Francisco's leaving and coming back, and he goes, will you put the heat on in my house? And Hugh Akston says, I will, and I'll have your supper ready for you when you arrive.
Right.
So just that touch of warmth, that caring, that paternal love, and more than paternal love, because he's so proud of them. Just that experience of proud is what you get, what we get as readers when we read about Hugh Akston. And so, well, I want to thank you very much. This has been wonderful talking about Dr. Hugh Akston and his psychology and all the wonderful things we've learned from him. And I want to thank Dr. Andy Bernstein and Dr. Shoshana Milgram and Razi and Dr. Ellen Kenner.
Dr. Ellen Kenner, Dr. Shoshana Milgram, and Shoshana Milgram has been great. Thank you. Razi Ginsburg, thanks for setting this up, big guy. This is a great series. Fun.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.